Today, it's Edwin's Monday evening property rant. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Well, that is post covering finance and property news. Can you believe it? Monday's come around again. So Edwin's come around again. Edwin, welcome back. We are in peak BS land, I think.
We are, Martin, from all over the world, local news, state news, federal, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of BS, but at the end of the day, yeah, do we feel sorry for the poor little bunnies that aren't getting their results? That's the headline for the show tonight. Yeah, poor little bunnies, boo hoo hoo, and cry me a river.
Yeah. Well, you made this very interesting post, which I think really calls it out quite well. We have the receipts, we have the proof, deceptive marketing campaigns, not matching the private treaty campaigns in terms of result. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And then we might, in a second or two, touch the broader issue with regard to the latest monthly data that's just come out and claiming booms left, right, and centre. You know, everybody is now saying house prices are going through the roof. There's just so much more going on here than the top level sprouting and spruiking and everything else is actually saying. So there's some really important points. And I'm afraid that a lot of people are being fooled.
They are, Martin, and yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. There are some there are some great results out there. If you consider yourself a vendor looking for a great result, there are some great results out there for homes that are marketed well and presented well, and the campaigns go in line with with a lot of transparency, and the results that are very much skewing the narratives from left, right, and centre are the ones that are filled with a lot of smoke and mirrors, and they're very deceiving, bait advertising, and hence the reason why there's a lot of chest beating. Oh, look at me, look at me. We had on the market at 1.5, and it sold for 2,200,000. Wow, I achieved 700,000 above the reserve, and then AFR and all these other so-called property reporters and publications pick up the BS, and they run with it because a lot of the reporters and commentators on social media and in the mainstream don't understand property, don't understand really what's going on. So a lot of what's going on the ground is really skewing data left, right, and center. And then, of course, you've also got websites that pick this up. Yeah, those websites with funny little names that I don't dare mention because I get caned by a lot of people. And look, and data is delayed. The wrong data is put out. Asking prices don't necessarily match the settled prices, as I call them, and vendors' expectations. And it's an upheaval. It's a whirlwind of information, and the average punter has to sift through all that information, has to sift through all the BS, has to sift through all the smoke and mirrors, and all the collusion that's going on between agents and vendors. And a lot of people are being dismayed. Not only buyers are being dismayed, but also vendors themselves. And the ones that walk away with money in their pocket are the selling agents that, regardless of the result, good, bad, or ugly, they're still getting paid. And the auctioneers are cashing in, $1,200 for 15 minutes of shouting and screaming at the crowd.
Absolutely. And just to underscore that, this post, which included a comment from Tarek saying an acquaintance attempted to auction their property in Sydney recently. The reserve was around 25% more than the guide price. At the agent's heavy insistence, it was passed in. And, we've talked about bait advertising and, the misleading conduct that's going on at the moment. People are being fooled left, right, and centre. And unfortunately, my one-on-one conversations over the last couple of weeks have included no less than 3 people who ended up paying more than they should have because they were actually swept up in the whirlwind and swept up in the hype. Actually, they were all auctions. And they went in with a firm view of what they were prepared to pay. But in each case, they ended up being skewered to pay more. And of course, in retrospect, they're now worried about what they've done and are trying to figure out whether they've really made a major error or not. And we're seeing this again and again. Unfortunately, the newspaper reporting isn't helping at the moment, of course, either, because everybody is now piling on with the concept of the idea that everybody's, going to actually see prices rise. We had this some time ago, inflation data, no barrier to further rate cuts. And therefore, people are talking about, prices going through the roof. The home value index from Cotality, or CoreLogic as we used to know them, showed a bit of a rise. And in fact, they pretty much claimed that everybody was seeing rises. By the way, it's worth noting in passing that the rental prices are still climbing, not quite as much, but there is quite a significant hike still, particularly among unit rent prices, which I think is interesting. But anyway, the media went off the deep end. First-time buyers fueling home price rises, 2 cuts of the official cash rate, and quoting the Cotality data there. And of course, then the editorials go, all over the place, and the journalists go to town. Home values grow by $250 a day. Melbourne house prices are leading. 960,000 by Christmas, they say. The RBA is going to spur on house prices in Sydney. Sydney's median home prices up to 1.5 million after rate cuts. Whoa. Brisbane now battling 1.5 million, and most workers priced out. You really, I have to say, I shake my head and thinking people should just cool down, just chill, just understand that this is not telling the full story by any means. And these average aggregate data indices, high level, delayed, and actually, I think, quite deceptive in terms of what's really going on the ground. And, I can point to areas still where prices are falling rather than not. I actually made a show yesterday called "Is the financial stress worm finally turning, or is it eating its young?" And my hypothesis is that what we're seeing at the moment is there is a little bit of upward movement because people are able to be able to borrow a little more, but that's putting more pressure on affordability. So in fact, affordability is deteriorating rather than not. And as a result of that, a lot of households are in significant pressure. And just in passing, I will just drop a quick advert to this. Tomorrow I'm on with Leith Van Onselen for my live show, and we're going to talk about the property nightmare ahead, ? Where is this all going? Because I think we should ask that question as well. There is a lot here beyond this high level story. And, when you talk to individuals and you hear their journey, they're trying to navigate. Well, it's like a minefield, frankly. They're trying to navigate this story, whether they're trying to buy or sell or work out what to do. And it's getting harder and harder to get really good information about what's actually going on. And more and more, there's data delayed, data not actually shared. Makes it very, very difficult for people to try and figure out exactly what the real story is. As a result of that, it's not surprising that people just shake their heads and say, well, I don't know. And then, of course, you have things like this when the ACCC is probing the REA group over price gouging concerns and thinking, well, just remember, folks, a lot of these portals, they have interests. They have interests, and those interests relate to getting more people to come and look at the portals, more clicks, more views, more listings. There's a bit of an agenda here, Edwin, isn't there?
Yeah, look, one of the things that people have to figure out, and our followers and our viewers have figured it out a long time ago, and that is the information that you get given by the mainstream media and everybody else that's freely available and easy to obtain. You've got to take that with a grain of salt, and you've got to really dissect that and have a very clear understanding of what it is. And look, case in point is this push for the so-called free building and pest reports that are now dished out through the domain website, which is the before you bid, before you buy, and where you get your strata reports, and they cost next to nothing in some cases. In some cases, agents are even giving them away. Why? Because they're very lightweight reports in terms of the issues that that are inherent in the property that you're buying with a lot of emotion at the auction. So when you've got a lot of people, especially the young, the first home buyers, which I've been saying for over a decade and a half now, they were the sacrificial lambs. From 2.5 decades ago, they became the sacrificial lambs, and when the different political parties of different persuasions were trying to buy votes, whether it be at a state level or a federal level, they just use them as cannon fodder, and unfortunately the young, they believe them, and because they're aspiring to have a property that they can secure, and they can settle down and have a family, and contribute to local communities, and have that peace of mind, and that standard of living that everybody was, the great Australian dream. It wasn't as much as owning a piece of dirt. It was more having that tranquility and that peace of mind that you're not going to get turfed and you're going to get put on the street, whether you were an owner or a renter. But which we don't have that luxury anymore. So now you've got young people competing with all this emotion that's been thrown around, and all this emotion that's and pushed for at auctions. And this is where you've got this, these bait advertising, misleading bait advertising campaigns, deceptive campaigns, and where owners of properties have been persuaded in order to go with the narrative of price it low and watch it go, in order to create that emotion. Because without it, we get to some sort of a sense of reality of where the market is at. But selling agents need that emotion in order to achieve a sale of one that they can beat the chest with. But you know what? Slowly things are turning, but unfortunately this ship's going to take a long time to turn, Martin. And in the meantime, the young, the first-time buyers will always be the cannon fodder, and will always be the lambs that go to the slaughter, whichever whatever terminology you want to use. They're always going to be thrown under the bus. And they're the ones that miss out. And where you do see prices that are growing, and still growing at great speeds in terms of, in comparison to a lot of other markets in Sydney, are your southwest regions and your west regions, where the $1 million properties, the $1 million homes, freestanding homes, are a rarity, are a rare gem now as well. So you're going to have a lot of movement there, because what this market has done is, and which we'll talk a little bit more in detail as well with other trends later on in the show, and that is what this market has done is made it even more competitive for the first home buyers. The competition between the first home buyers and the investors, has grown a lot, because investors know what they're buying. The seasoned buyers, the majority, not all, but the majority know what they're after. And when you start talking about the groups that I often commonly refer to, that influence a lot of markets, which are chatterers first, the new kids on the block, and your silent tigers. We got to understand that their MO, in terms of buying and what they do with property, is not like your traditional investor would buy an investment property and give it to a local real estate agent to lease it out by, and be under the regulations and the legislation. Most of it's cash in hand, and most of it is getting 20, 30 individuals in a 4 or 5 bedroom home, in sharing bunks, in order to maintain the costs, but they're still turning a dollar. They're still making money. So this is what you've got. So there's a lot of distorted information, but as you said, Martin, a lot of it is hidden. Look, we pay close to 450. Our team collectively, we pay close to 450, probably 470, maybe a tad more, on monthly subscriptions to websites that we're able to get information that your average painter won't be able to obtain. and hence, and this is why we use that information. Apart from that, we've also got our local contacts in the majority of the markets around Sydney. We've got access to a lot of other data and information that your average punter doesn't have because they're only buying one property in a lifetime. And they are pretty much placed behind the eight ball, and the decisions they make are, sometimes shocking. And it's not only a matter of paying that little bit extra because now the interest rates have dropped, 25 basis points, 50 basis points, and then they, potentially to drop another 25 or 50, whatever the case may be. But they don't realize that what they're buying when they're buying those lemons is that they're buying a potential debt that is going to materialize within 3 months, 6 months. Best case scenario, 12 months of, that could potentially cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars to rectify, and have all sorts of issues with the property, which is not planned for, and the banks won't lend against that, in the short term. So yeah, there's there's a lot going on, Martin, and this is where people are starting to realise, and people like, Tarek are starting to pick up as well what we've been talking about for a very, very long time. And this is what we've been educating our followers and our viewers on, and that is, be careful what marketing campaign you adopt when moving forward, because it could cost you not only tens of thousands of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. The difference of getting an extra $30,000 by way of a sale, is to the agent, 1.5 of 30,000, which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, is not a lot of money. It's really not a lot of money. It's pittance for the selling agents. But but it's, 20, $30,000 in the vendor's pocket is a lot of money. And the other thing the other danger of adopting these strategies also is, the demise of the value of the property. You're diminishing the value of the property because you're putting out to market the wrong perception, the wrong message. And as I said, people are more educated, and they will go and they'll challenge those guides. Hence the reason why we've seen one in Quakers Hill that, over a 6-week period, the property's being auctioned 3 times. It's it's crazy the shit that goes on. I watch it live. I attended one of the auctions, attempted to attend the last one, but from the first one, they're playing all sorts of silly buggers. But this is what's happening out there, and so the general public are getting caught on both sides of the spectrum. They're getting caught, by all these shenanigans and all this misinformation and controls that are put in at play by the industry, whether you're a vendor or whether you're a buyer. And they're the losers in the majority of the cases. As I said, the winners are the ones that walk away with a commission in the pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem is that if you are going in ill-armed with information and you get caught up with the emotion, then of course you end up in the wrong place. And unfortunately, as I've mentioned before, Edwin, and just to re-emphasize again, when you buy a property, right, it's what's called a punctiliar action. So in other words, the decision you take on that day has consequence subsequently. What that means is if you buy a property that's got lots of defects in it, or lots of things that actually need to be fixed, and it then is a drain on your finances, it means that it's very hard to be able to actually deal with that ahead. And we're seeing that in some of our surveys, and that's why financial stress is still pretty high. The other point I will make, and I think it's quite important to understand, if you look at the financial aggregates, this is from the RBA for April, the credit housing over the last year is up by 5.8%, up 0.5% in April, up 5.8% over the last year. Now, when you think about the fact that the inflation rate is meant to be at 2.8 or give or take, what we're seeing is that we've got more and more people are more and more leveraged up into property. And it's, we've said before, a lot of it's to do with investors, A lot of it's to do with first-time buyers, both of whom have quite high debt levels. And sure, I know that the interest rates are coming down, and this shows you that the lowest variable interest rate in some circumstances might be around the five something now. As the banks followed it. Oh, on postscript, of course, we should also say that savings rates have been haircutted as well. So people have got less now on their savings. But the bottom line is that we've got more people leveraged up to more property. And that debt is not equally spread across everybody, of course. If you actually look at recent purchases, there are some purchases that have actually used family money. There are some purchases that have actually used down trading, so they've actually shrunk their exposure. But I'm worried about the first-time buyers and some of those perhaps more naive investors who are leveraging massively up, driven by this idea that property prices can only go higher from this point, universally, right? It's the universal rule of property. Property only ever goes up, except it doesn't, of course. And so you've ended up with households that are actually highly leveraged and therefore highly exposed. Question, will rates drop as much as people are expecting? Well, maybe, maybe not. But question also, how good is the property that you've bought? What liabilities are you walking into without really fully understanding it? And what are the consequences of that? And thirdly, of course, in a highly leveraged situation, you are also exposed to externalities, anything from health events or relationship events or other external events, job changes and things like that. So there's a reason to be cautious, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, but when you've got a growth in the public sector and you feel somewhat secure, well, that's one way that the government can assure future purchases, and they've got to create an interest in purchasing a lot, which is what I've been saying for a while now, and you and I've been discussing for a while, and that is they've got to create an interest. The government's got to create an interest in purchasing off the plan in high-rise developments. Otherwise, they won't be able to get these developments off the ground, Martin, unless you start bringing in a lot of heavy levels of money, a lot of money from overseas through institutional investors, or the government starts putting their hand in the pocket, which is effectively our pocket, and starts backing some of these developments. Look, you can have a grandiose dream of building 1.2 million homes. Now we're into the fourth year, and you've got to ask yourself the question: well, where are they? They've got another 3 years to go. And where are we in terms of those figures? If we're going to meet those targets over the next 5 years, we've got to start building something like 460,000 new dwellings per annum. But when you start looking at the approvals, and when you start looking not only approvals that have gone down, but also when you start looking at commencements of developments, I mean, it's next to zero. And all the developers that I talked to, they used to, they were in the game, pre 2020. They were heavily in the game. They're fishing. They're just out there on the boats fishing and doing everything else and enjoying their toys. And they keep on telling me the same story. We're just waiting for the government to give us a call and say, hey, we'll back the development with X amount or a percentage of it, or we'll give you. It's not the incentive of giving them an extra yield on the floor space ratios isn't working. The amount of dwellings they could build over a block of land is not working, because at the end of the day, they still got to build it. At the end of the day, they still got to put money in their pocket, and they've still got to rely on investors. So you've got to create that investor pool. You've got to create that interest. So the unfortunate thing, which then also satisfy the other barking dog, which are the universities, with yapping for foreign tuition money, is the more foreign students. It's inevitable. It's more foreign students. Is it going to be more temporary visa holders from abroad in order to come in order to encourage more investors to think about buying off the plant. Because without a market, there's no activity. Without that activity, you've got a limited supply. So they've got to continue to create that artificial demand in order to keep this thing rolling down. But without it, because of the sheer number of people, migrants, short-term visa holders, the ghost migrants, and everybody else in between. Local investors trying to capitalize on the immigration policies of past that have created all these demands. Well, then at the end of the day, the supply, although it seems to be there's on face value, it would appear that some markets have slowed down, but when you start looking very closely, you look at the numbers in those markets are generally more geared to strata developments than they are to the freestanding homes. But so it's a mess, and people have got enough on their plate, thinking about job security, thinking about affordability, thinking about education for the kids, and yet they've got to navigate through everything else in order to try and make what they would consider to be a logical, sane decision. And unfortunately, they get swayed, and the selling agent's role is to push them more towards the emotion than logic and reason. And that's why I say most people buy property on emotion, and most people sell property on emotion rather than the basic rules and principles of logic and reason.
Absolutely. And you see that, at auctions, but you see it outside of auctions too. So it is important to understand that even if you're going for private treaty sales, the emotion can be still there. So, you need to really counterbalance any of the emotional reaction with the data-driven reaction. And just on the data, it's interesting if you reflect on this. Is actually from Leith over at Macro Business. Albo's housing target. The green is showing what the trend could be based on the State of the Housing Market Report 2025, and they're estimating around 260,000 dwellings below Labor's target if they sort of chart it the way that they're looking at. And, there are big questions there. Mind you, of course, the other question is, can you find anywhere to build? I'm thinking of the Rose Hill Racecourse debacle, right? So suddenly MIM's, you can't build there. So that project's gone. So where are they going to build? That's the other question. And what is the cost of building? And again, I had an interesting conversation this week with a builder who's been in the speculative unit construction sector. He's now out of it. The reason? You can't make any money because the costs are too high, and that includes all of the fees and charges and planning rules and regulations and everything else, cost of labor, cost of materials, and the cap on what you can actually sell it for. So, the economics of building, particularly high rise, are completely shot.
They are, and this is why they've got to said earlier on that the governments, the state and federal governments have got to create that demand in order for the developers to persuade the developers to and builders to build the ones that were building them pre 2020. This is why we sounded the alarm when our old mate Don Perrottet went over to India before the end of his tenure, and we called him up. We called it. We said the Indians are coming. We called it, and look, here we are now. I'm look the other call, as I said earlier on, is also you're gonna want to kill two birds with one stone, and that is the university's call for more students. Although when you start looking at the huge revenue, and this is what Earl Holdings in that post what he put there. You got to ask yourself the question: when universities start raking in, what was it? What's that? 61 billion dollars over a 12-month. You got to ask yourself the question: what the hell are they doing with that money? dear Lord, the vice chancellor is going from 1 million to 2 or 3 million. I mean, well, seriously, what are they doing? I mean, I know from uh, from people in the know. I've been told that UTS, according to this graph, UTS made $18 billion in 2024, but yet a little birdie told me that. They're $150 million in the red, and they're sending out emails to the staffers, uh, telling them there's going to be a cost reduction, a reduction in salaries and whatnot, and they're trying to find 100 to 200 million dollars in order to keep certain programs afloat. I mean, that's a shitload of money, Martin, in anybody's language. What the hell are they doing with it?
Well, it's interesting because if you look carefully at the wages and remuneration at the top of these education establishments, they are paid a mozza, an absolute mozza, and you've got to ask why. Why is it that this is the economic structure that we've got now? It seems to me that what we have is effectively we suck in foreign students, we grab that revenue as far as we can. I know government funding for universities is under severe pressure, but you've got to look at the economics and you've got to ask the question: does it make any sense? And I've always asked the question. In fact, my late wife, who worked in the university sector for years and years and years, kept saying, "I don't understand why we keep just pumping more through the university education system, because what we're actually doing is we're reducing the quality of the education in those institutions. What we're doing is effectively just pumping the machine and churning more people out with really poor quality and low value degrees. And meanwhile, the people at the top, not just the people who are lecturers, but the people at the top of the organization, they're actually earning way, way, way more than, the prime minister or anybody else in the country. It is distorted, and it's massively distorted. And I do think it's in the self-interest of those at the top of these academic organizations to look after their own interests rather than what they should be doing. And this is a root cause issue, which of course then is leading directly back into the property sector.
Yeah.
Demand for property is high. Why? Because we've got huge flows of students coming into Australia. They're attracted in. And it's also just worth reflecting, of course, that the way the economics work, that education flow is somehow magically shown as an economic advantage to Australia, when in fact a lot of the money disappears anyway. And really, it's hard to understand why you would account for it in that way. So there are deep flaws here in the way that the economics of the academic sector work, and the flow effect onto the broader question of property. And that's why we're seeing specific hotspots in and around some of the universities where there's huge demand for rental properties, which sort of segues quite nicely actually into your next post, because this of course then begs the question: what is the cost of a room to let?
Yeah, and this is a conversation I had with an investor, and he's talking to him, and he said, you know what, pre the election, he's got 30 properties or thereabouts for under his belt, and he's been building a portfolio, but most of that portfolio has been built over the last few years because of the inflow of students, and the lack of supply for accommodation, and basically he's getting a rental average per room across all his properties across Sydney. He's getting an average of $384 per week on average per room. Now, pre the election, this is the interesting part, Martin. Pre the election, he was preparing to sell a good portion of his portfolio. And then when it got closer to the election, and he said when he knew that Albo and Co Real Estate were going to win, when he felt that they were going to win, he kept his portfolio, and now he's adding more to his portfolio because he's one to believe that, and he's not a WeChat chatter, by the way. And he's looking at building more to his portfolio, because he's believes that that there's going to be a lot more there's going to be a lot more inflow, and like I said, that is one way to to basically get people to buy into the high-rise developments, as well as solve the problem that the universities are crying poor when they're actually turning over squillions of dollars on an annual basis. That's the reality. That is where the rubber meets the road. That is the what we see, what I see on the ground, the discussions that I have with people, and that is this is the stuff that's not picked up by the mainstream media, of course, and this is the stuff that we share on the show and we share on all our social media outlets, so as people can try and understand and comprehend what happens when what these political parties are doing to the average person in Australia, and how they've forgotten the Aussie battlers, and they're battling a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of students who come to Australia suddenly magically find a way to stay and become permanent residents, and then of course put long-term demand on property as well. So it's almost like two waves. The first wave is through the education cycle, and they're getting support to do that. And then, of course, beyond that, they're part of the big migration, 1 million plus of people into the country, and that puts more demand on property, which prices out more ordinary Australians. And that's one of the reasons why I continue to grizzle strongly at the idea that a lot of young people in Australia who are trying to get into the property market can't. They're buying later if they can buy. They're leveraging up more if they can buy. Or they actually say, well, we're never going to buy. And that, of course, has its own consequences later in life. So, I mean, this is a huge crisis that's been created through bad policy over a generation or two. But the politicians, Albo Real Estate, and the universities, and what they've been up to, are all part of the jigsaw puzzle. And if you then add also into that the build to rent thematic that's coming through, and how these these big international investment firms are now being enticed to come into Australia to build for rent, which, by the way, means building not cheap but expensive property on the whole, which means that it doesn't necessarily impact the the rental situation very well. You can see how all of these jigsaw puzzle pieces are coming together, and actually it blocks ordinary people just trying to make their own life. And that's one of the reasons why the birth rate's much lower than it was, because people's formation of families is now later because they can't get into property. It's now later, in some cases 10 years plus later than previously. That also means, of course, more people go into old age with mortgages, and that also has consequences later as well. Or indeed, they never own a property, and that means that you're renting into old age. And of course, one of the big disasters as you move into old age is if you're into rented accommodation, because your income then gets squeezed, cost of living goes up, and then you've got a problem. So it's a massive, massive issue. And unfortunately, the joined up thinking that we need is just lost in a barrage of headlines about house prices ever going higher. Rates are going to get cut. It's going to be easy. Affordability is going to improve. No. Affordability is not going to improve. And it really comes back to some fundamental points here. And I just want to come back to this slide. If you think of the median house price and you think of the capacity to pay, you can see how, well, since about the year 2000, it's started to diverge, and it's really massively diverged recently. And the recent rate cuts and the expected rate cuts won't reverse that capacity to pay gap, because prices will continue to climb. And as prices climb, anybody who wants to get in has to actually leverage up even more. And that means that effectively you've got less chance of getting a property without breaking your financial back. And that's why when I did my run of data this month, the top level number dropped very slightly, but we've still got massive amounts of financial stress. Around half of Australians are in some degree of financial pressure at the moment, and that's pretty disgraceful. Now, talking about financial pressure, let's switch the conversation over because you can go across and look at the WeChat chat. And we've got a big question mark about BYD.
Well, look, this is like politicians like to burn our dreams as well. So let's BYD's. It's quite interesting. It's just one of those things in that the WeChat chatters are sort of hot on at the moment, but mainly in mainland China. To the point that the PI director has actually stepped into the a lot of these conversations that are happening online and trying to dispel a lot of the stuff that's being shared. So the first slide there is, here's what the PR director is saying, that he's basically saying, hey, listen, for a big company a company, a global company like us, to actually hold or to have $580 billion in debt is really not, it's really not not abnormal. If you've got Apple and Ford and other companies are carrying much higher debt than what we are. Obviously, the counter to that is that the commentators are saying is that, well, we don't believe you. Where you basically a lot of that, regardless of what you say, we're not going to believe you. We're not going to buy your vehicles. And in the second slide, it's talking about, well, then why was there a reduction in price, a huge reduction in price, and basically, a dumping of new BYD, in order for people to, to buy. And again, I mean, this conversation has been going backwards and forwards for about a week now. The long and the short of it is, Martin, is that the locals are not convinced. And that last slide that on the screen that you put up earlier on is more the commentators that are talking about the suppliers, because the PR director for BYD is basically saying, look, the debt that we hold is not bank debt. It's debt that's held with our suppliers. So, as if that makes it any better, the fact that the $580 billion debt they're carrying is on the suppliers. It's not bank debt, as if that makes it any better. And this is why a lot of the people are saying that, calling BYD the Evergrande of electric vehicles, the Evergrande of the electric cars. Because it was a similar scenario with Evergrande, where most of the debt was held by the contractors. So what they're saying now is that the commentator in the commentary there, they're saying, look, we know for a fact that a lot of the suppliers, because a lot of the suppliers have got into the chatter as well, and there's a lot of suppliers. If you're a good supplier, you're getting paid your debt within 3 months. If you're an average supplier, you're getting paid your debt within 6 months. And if you're if you're not held in good stead with CCP, well, then your debt's going to be paid over 12 months, and more than likely you're the one that's going to be burning the most incense every night. In other words, praying that you're going to for a miracle that you're going to get paid before it sinks. I guess from what's happening there, and to have the CEO, to have uh, the PR director step into the chatter and start, and then obviously there's a lot of censorship going on as well, and people are getting fined online there. You got to ask yourself the question, what's really going on? Because at the end of the day, if it wasn't true, what people were saying, I'm one to believe that, you can just come out and say, listen, this is all bullshit, and and that's it. Yeah, but to actually get involved in the discussion, there's a lot more to the story, right? And really getting all emotional in the discussion. I mean, Dusty and Evan are just having uh, you know, just just fascinated by all the commentary that's going on. But how is that going to affect us, Martin, with regards to A lot of homes here, a lot of people here are going and are being led into this, the EV, movement, and it's another form of potentially we're going to not only us but the rest of the world. Because what they're saying is, okay, well, if you're not paying your suppliers, how does that guarantee that the vehicles are going to get serviced? How does that guarantee that we're going to get when one battery dies and it's in the vehicle still under warranty? How's that going to guarantee us that we're going to get the second battery? How's it going to guarantee ongoing service and maintenance of the vehicles? And but not only for the people in China, but also for the rest of the world. And what impact will that have? That is just an extra burden on an extra potential burden on on something that people said, well, look, I'm not going to buy a Tesla. And by the way, this show tonight's Monday evening property rant is not sponsored by Tesla, as much as people have made commentary on my post that they think that Elon is Elon is giving me a backhander of sorts. No, this it's just commentary as to all the things that are outside of people's controls, and they're blindly going into purchasing. Uh, I mean, EVs aren't. I mean, they're not that expensive when you compare it to other cars, but it's still another cost and potential scenario where we could end up with all sorts of a lot of people. I mean, you got the lower range and you got the higher range as well, and you got so what is going to happen? I thought it was just interesting. I thought I'd bring it up in the show because obviously people are interested in what the WeChat chatter is going on about, and this is what's I guess in a way, Martin, this is a little bit of a distraction from their call to get the mortgages in order and prepare for spring buying. So they're a little bit distracted, so people can go out there and 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 snap some properties in some of the markets because the WeChat chatters are too busy, reading up on BYD.
Yes, well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and I think the whole EV question is a very open one at the moment. In the UK, they're looking to change some of the tax that people aren't paying at the moment on EVs because, of course, more EVs are now being rolled out, and that's going to create some interesting behavioural changes, I think, as well. So there's a lot to unpack there. And as for the long-term reliability, well, we don't know yet, right? A lot of the EVs are too new to know what happens when you actually need to replace the battery train. What's that cost going to be? Can you get the battery when you want it, et cetera, et cetera? And, how long will they last? And, of course, that's another interesting open question. Let's just move on briefly to the numbers, Edwin. It's interesting if you look at the Sydney numbers, and this is based on the domain definition of the Sydney region. On the 26th, we had 20,523 properties listed. If we jump forward to the 2nd of June, 20,281. That's very interesting. So you can see there that we've got 20,523 to 20,281. So a bit of a drift down. And if you want to look at it in terms of trending, you can see that there was a slight fall. But it is, again, interesting to note that the tracking is still above where it was last year or in 2023. Now, that's an interesting observation, given what we've just said about the demand and potentially about interest rates.
Yeah, look, I think people are a little bit more cautious as to what they're buying and when they're buying. And the numbers aren't homes aren't being sold as quickly as what a lot of selling agents would like to think. I think what we're moving into and we're pretty much into, is what we would call in previous years a normal period of selling. It's just that people have been accustomed to uh, seeing properties come on the market, and within 3 to 4 weeks they're gone. But things are lagging because, and also we really have reached another peak level of home values across many markets of Sydney. And how much higher some of these markets can go is another question. Also, I guess with that, we have had an increase in from last year to this year. We have had a substantial increase in land envelopes, which don't get absorbed as quickly as well. And we've also got a lot of units. Homes have been steady for the last couple of years. The when you look at the the freestanding home numbers, but it's the other, yeah, the strata complexes, high rise buildings, and land envelopes that the main group also pick up in the region that are fueling these numbers. But yeah, it's but overall, in general terms, overall, some markets have slowed. They're still selling. Yeah, prices are still, they're not, I don't see, I'm not, in the markets that we're looking at for our clients, we're not seeing substantive drops. I mean, where we're seeing some out of line sales from the normal is by the agent's foolishness in the strategy that they've adopted to sell certain properties, or the properties need a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, again, in my one-on-one conversations, I've had a couple of people who've taken me through some of the horrendous journey that they've gone on. When they bought a property, they knew that there was some work to be done on the property. But when they sat down and actually started talking to builders about what it would cost to make those changes and alterations and improvements, the costs started to climb significantly. And, it goes back to the same old problems. Of course, can you find a builder that's going to be reliable? What is the cost of the labor for the work that needs to be done? What is the cost of the materials and availability of the materials that you require? And when you put that all together, the net result has been that the improvement costs are much more extensive and expensive than originally planned. Now, when you actually think about buying a property that needs work, again, I want to underscore it's really, really important to make sure you do your homework on what that improvement cost will be versus the upside you might get. Because what I'm seeing with some of my conversations is that people actually lumber themselves with huge commitments in terms of work to be done. And okay, you can be a bit elastic over some of the work, although if you've got a leaking roof, left so. But the fact of the matter is that if you're not careful, you can end up effectively thinking you've got a bargain because it's an older style property that needs work, etc., when in fact you don't, because the cost of doing the work is going literally through the roof. So I think that's an important object lesson, and it's something which I think people haven't done enough thinking about.
No, they haven't grasped it, and this is what I'm saying. You've got to stay away from before you buy, before you bid, and those before you buy strata reports, and do your own. You've got to pay the money and do your own, and have the conversation with the building inspector that you choose. And the first question that you need to ask the building inspector you're going to choose is say, do you provide building inspection reports to that organization before you buy it? Because if they do, again, they're not going to do. They do not want to bite the hand that feeds them.
Yeah.
This is what people have got to understand, Martin. People try to avoid paying the 650 to, on average, 650 to $750 on a building and pest report, because they get conned into paying 45 or $65 for the before you bid. And if you think that they are weighty, they're not. They're very, it's loose fill. It's very light on the reporting, and there is no way that you can have a decent conversation with the person that put that report together and get anything substantive out of them, because they're not going to tell you. They do not want to bite the hand that feeds them. And unfortunately, you get look, and they come from all different people are just wanting to get work, right? They the building inspectors have obviously what we need, the contractors, they need to get work themselves. There's contracting out. They've bought franchises from different organizations, and then they subscribe their services, or they provide the services to that organization, and you get the old saying goes, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, and you get very, very light reports. So you've got to spend that money. And now, not not all building inspectors, very few will actually give you uh, because they're not entitled to give you a costing, particularly in writing, because that is not part of the. I mean, when they deregulated the industry, I mean, the report only need to be visual and. When they read and need to be visual, they don't have to push things out of the way to note, yeah, to look at things. But if you're going to be paying them $750, you got to ask them what you got to tell them what you want from it, and at the end you've got to, which is what we do for our clients, is for all my associates when they order reports from the building inspectors that we use. You know, 99.9 times, I will personally go and meet the inspector on site, and I will accompany the inspector and point to specific areas where I want things to be looked at in greater detail. And because they've known me for quite a number of years, obviously then yeah, we're able to discuss in my knowledge in the building game, we're able to discuss the a guesstimate on what it would cost to be able to give more of a report, a meteor report to our clients, and that's going to determine whether or not we move forward on the property, whether or not the vendors are going to, because the vendors they believe those reports themselves because they don't know themselves, because the agents have already instructed the building inspector, hey, go light on this one because we want to sell the property. And you know, and if the owners don't, they don't, they're none the wiser in a lot of the cases themselves. So this is what goes on out there, Martin, and this is where people have got to be careful. This is what I'm saying. We've reached another level, another point of of pricing of property across many city markets, and people are buying and even if they're being renovated, they're not really doing they're not really checking them properly. They just get they get fooled by the new shiny 40 mil stone bench tops in the kitchen, and then the newly renovated bathrooms, and they say, hey, this must be good. And you pay premium. You pay not only the what it would, the cost plus plus that there's a plus on the fact that you don't have to do it yourself, on the fact that it's there, on the fact that you can just move in, bring your furniture, bring your clothes, you move in, and you shut the door behind you, to the rest of the world. But unfortunately, a lot of it is not done properly, and people get caught out. So yeah, you've really got to people have got to start understanding that selling agents are not their friends.
No, spot on. And of course, if you do get your own independent report and create an awareness of what work needs to be done, that puts you in a much stronger position then to negotiate a price. And in fact, I've mentioned before, I knew that there was some work to be done on this property, and I used that information, and I got the information available and was able to squeeze the price down based on the fact that this was work that needed to be done. And I ended up therefore being ahead. In fact, then, of course, the tree came through the roof, and I actually had the roof done for free. So it was a double win for me. Anyway, let's go on to talk about Melbourne briefly. So in Melbourne, on the 26th, there were 27,988 properties. A week later, 26,443, so a further fall. Again, it's worth highlighting, houses make up the majority here in the Melbourne region. And again, I still call out the fact that a lot of the stuff being listed in the Melbourne region is stuff that were ex-investment properties, a lot of stuff that needs a lot of work. So be cautious about some of the stuff that's being listed at the moment. In Brisbane, 3,682 on the 26th, 3,682 compared with 3,593 the week later. So you can see that there's a bit of a consistent trend as we go into the depths of the winter season. And just looking at the auction counts, well, Looks as though the auction rates will be a little higher. Maybe we'll see. Interestingly, the data, of course, is always a bit distorted, and it was interesting. There were quite a few articles coming out saying auction clearance rates up. When you look closely, there was hardly any movement actually, and this comes through in your data, Edwin.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing. This is what the mainstream media haven't picked up on, and you've almost got 8 weeks of lackluster results in terms of confidence. What I call the confidence gauge, with people really not being that confident. Yeah, we went through the some holidays. We went through school holidays. We went through public holidays, and now we've got the King's birthday long weekend coming up. There's not a lot there, but when you start looking at overall, that's 8 weeks and when if you were to add all those numbers up, and I would say that we're running at 60%. The level of numbers that we were running same time last year, same weeks last year. And you've got to ask yourself the question, why? And as said before, it's my confidence level gauge more than anything. It's showing me that people are shying away from their short marketing campaigns and not selling the properties or not achieving the price expectations that vendors want, regardless of the fact that they may want over the odds, and regardless of the fact that agents have told them that they're going to get over the odds to buy the listing. They're saying, hey, auctions are not the way to go, and we want a different strategy. Is that one of the reasons? Also, obviously, the confidence in the market, because in general terms, people put a lot of weight. The mainstream media and the general punter out there puts a lot of weight on the auctions. But so although the so-called auction clearance rates are higher week on week from this week to the same week in 2024 by 4 percentage points, why are the numbers so low? Why are the numbers lower? So yeah, it's again when you start drilling into the different markets, obviously when you start drilling into different markets and you start looking at not only the type of property, but you start looking at the style of campaign and the agents that are driving the campaigns, makes a big difference. And people have got to start moving forward with a lot of caution if they're looking at putting the properties on the market, and uh, they really need our services to help them and assist them to move along.
Absolutely. And it is interesting if you look at the other value tracker slide that you produce, which is this one here. It's quite interesting if you can look at the median home and apartment value tracker for Sydney and Melbourne. Interestingly, this time, the only one that was up was Melbourne apartments, which have been languishing for some little time, which tells us something important too.
Yeah, and if you go back to the numbers on markets, there's something like 5,784 apartments on market this week, and there's close to 15,000 homes. In a lot of those apartments, I mean, 5,000 is, and it's something like 3,500 less apartments on market than what Sydney has. And a lot of those apartments are the apartments that are closer to sorry, to the CBDs. So yeah, it's an interesting the movements in type of property, style of property, and who's going for these properties. I guess also, Martin, the obviously when you look at the land tax component, you're paying a lot more land tax on freestanding homes than you are on apartments because you're a portion of a percentage of the land envelope that the property sits on. It's not the value of the property, but it's the land component of the value of the property that you're going to get taxed on. So hence the reason why there's a lot less as well. So there's a lot less a lot less apartment sales. That would be one of my guesses. The other one is, of course, the apartments are in greater demand there because they are a lot of the apartments that have been built are closer to the central hubs and the educational facilities, whereas a lot of the homes that are for sale are in the more in the outskirts, in the fringes of the Melbourne region.
Well, but of course, also apartments are cheaper, and from an affordability standpoint, many people are being excluded from buying houses because they're just way too expensive. I'm still seeing people needing to leverage up to 6, 7, 8, or even 9 times income just to buy a house. And that really, for many people, is just not possible, which means that the only choice is an apartment. And there are quite a few apartments in that inner suburban ring around Melbourne itself. Some of them in quite high-rise blocks. Just remember, folks, that a lot of them are poorly built as well, so that's worth thinking about. Just looking at the rental story in Sydney, on the 19th of May, we had 11,234, and on the 2nd of June, 11,444 in Sydney. So that's the trend there. And in Melbourne, on the 19th, we had 11,595, and on the 2nd of June, 11,693. So a little bit of a rise in property listings. That's partly, I guess, the time of year. But I would also highlight again, Edwin, what I said earlier on. If you look at the latest data from Cotality, it's still showing that rents are still rising, just not rising quite as much. And remember, of course, that that's advertised rents. And we are still seeing, unfortunately, rent increases being imposed on people in situ in apartments and creating disastrous decisions. Do I stay and pay more, or do I try and find somewhere else? And if I find somewhere else, can I? And what do I have to pay for it there? So unfortunately, the rental sector is still where I see the bulk of my financial stress at the moment, as I just covered in my show yesterday. So as we come to the end of the show, there's just a little insight, which I think is quite fascinating. Sometimes the old ones are the best ones, eh?
Yeah, look, if you want to live longer, you gotta stay active. That's the tip of the week. It's something that we've been told for. Yeah, well, it's not new. Yeah, but you just got to stay. You just got to stay active. I mean, you look at these 3 old goats. They are the. I believe that they were around when they were building the pyramids. And yeah, they might have even been around when Noah needed to do the launch pad for the ark. So you've got Uncle Joe, who is the biggest, the one with the biggest broader shoulder there. Uncle Joe, he's actually the one on the left there. He's actually 82 years old, Martin. And Uncle Peter there on the left is 74, and then you got Uncle Nick, I think it is the on the right, is 75 next to Uncle Joe. I mean, these are guys. These guys, they just keep on moving. They're just beyond the ever ready battery. Life expectancy. They must have a nuclear reactor inside of them, because they just keep on going. And what they said, that with the builder that I went up there to have a look at the project that they were doing. The builders, obviously the nephew is in his 40s, and what he said is he can't keep him at home. You can't keep him at home. They go crazy. But they'll take on any young any young whippersnipper that wants to. Well, they'll start at they're on the tools on the site no later than 6:30. Uncle Peter gets a few whiskeys inside of him before he starts his day, but that keeps him going, and they go on till knockoff time, and outdo most of the young fellas that try to do the same work. Concreting is not easy.
That's amazing. And, the sort of the broader message is, of course, stay active, live longer, right? And I think this is really important. I mean, I try to get my 25,000 steps a day in, and mostly do these days, which is good with the dogs. But it does seem to me very important that, from a lifestyle and from a health perspective, and actually from a mental health perspective, and from a, broader wellness point of view, being active and, keep moving is really, really important. And in fact, the more research that I read, the more it seems to me that activity is a really important element, for longevity, but also for life balance and for everything else too. So I think it's a really important tip. And when things get dark, and when financial pressures and everything else come through, sometimes the simple things of getting out and just being active gets put on the shelf. Whereas actually, to my mind, it should be absolutely core and center of what you do.
Yeah, that, and if you want to get away from the missus, well, hey, you don't have to get away from your missus.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that if I didn't take my two dogs out and take them for long walks, they would be unbearable. So that's another reason to have dogs. Edwin, very interesting show tonight. Thank you very much for spending some time with us as normal on a Monday. And I'll look forward to doing it all again next week. There will be more shenanigans, more stupidity to talk about, of course. And I want to say thanks for putting all the slides together as always.
Oh, look, and let's see if BYD's still standing as well. It's going to be interesting. We'll keep abreast of that. And for those that are that don't follow me already on X, follow me on Just Think One, and I'll keep you up to date. Yeah, well, blow by blow.
Absolutely. Well, we have our fingers on the pulse, and we've always got plenty to rant about on a Monday. Thank you, Edwin. Take care. Bye bye.
Yes, thanks, man. Ciao.